My name is Philip Travis. I'm a professor of history. This is continuing our lecture on ancient Rome. This part of the lecture, we're going to examine the Roman Empire, a period of some 500 years, a very complex period in Roman history in which you see the Roman state rise to its most significant point, both in terms of economic power, geographic power, political power, and so forth. But also a period of time that witnessed tremendous transformations, rise of tyrannical leaders, plagues, economic decline, and ultimately the imperial period briefly sows the seeds of Rome's sort of rise as a preeminent world power, but it also sows the seeds for the eventual decline and fall of Rome. And so in this segment of the lecture, we're going to examine some of the developments in the Roman Empire's rise to its sort of peak. We're also going to consider some of the reasons why Rome declined. Think about some of the lessons that these may carry for us in the modern age. On the top left, you see an image from the Roman Forum. Now, this image is near the Senate, the Roman Senate building. This image also is near a location called the Rostrum, which is where Roman rhetoricians and speakers would speak, and sometimes speak out against their leadership. In some cases, the Roman rhetorician Cicero would have given many influential speeches from this location. Of course, Cicero was eventually murdered for the things that he said. Of course, next to this, on the top right, you see the outside of the Roman Colosseum. The Roman Colosseum was built during the imperial time period, completed under the leadership of Emperor Vespasian, one of the Flavian emperors. And this massive, incredibly intact structure was really a political tool in the Roman state. It served as a way to placate the people. It housed numerous gladiatorial games where thousands and thousands of people would have lost their lives as a functioning not only of entertainment, but also as a form of almost state propaganda. And to the lower left, we see the Constantine Arch, the Triumphal Arch dedicated to the Emperor Constantine, who is most associated with the Edict of Milan at the beginning of the 4th century CE. Constantine and the Edict of Milan are associated with the legalization of Christianity in Rome, and eventually the state religion of Rome becomes Christianity in the last 200 years of the empire. Constantine also was associated with the founding of the city of Constantinople, which at the time was known as Byzantium, and today, of course, is known as Istanbul, located in modern-day Turkey near Greece. The Roman Empire dates from 27 BCE, or BC, to 476 CE, or AD. The first of the Roman emperors, of course, was Augustus Caesar, whose original name would have been Octavian. He was the adopted son of Julius Caesar. He becomes the Roman emperor, and he lives to be 75 years old, and he ruled from 27 BCE to 14 CE. Augustus Caesar is remembered as a very strong and effective emperor. He, of course, had come to power in the political battles, military battles even, if you will, following the assassination of Julius Caesar in 44 BCE. And he comes to power and very much assumes the role as the rightful emperor of Rome. He's a strong leader. He is well liked as a leader. He is arguably the greatest and most significant of the Roman leaders. He very much accepted the ideals of of Roman society and Roman culture, and he sought to emphasize the sort of Roman constructs of gender, of the virtue of the female, and of the strength and ruling power of the man, if you will. He sought to represent that, and he sought to inspire Romans to follow that lead. In fact, in one case, he even punished his own daughter for, if you will, breaking the gender constructs in Rome with respects to the behavior of women in Roman society. Though Augustus himself, it must be noted, behind closed doors, likely himself did not really fulfill all of the virtues expected of men in Roman society, but he sought to use this to sort of build an understanding on the people of what Rome was and what Rome should be and how a Roman should act. Augustus Caesar begins what's known as the Pax Romana, or the Roman peace, which lasts from the reign of Augustus, 27 BCE, until the death of the Stoic philosopher emperor Marcus Aurelius in 180 CE. Now, this is the period of the Roman peace, and usually that term, what we're referring to here, is this is a period of time where the greater Mediterranean world is largely under control and peacefully controlled by the Roman state. You could travel on the high seas without a great deal of chance of being robbed by pirates. The Romans built an incredible network of road systems and aqueducts. So cities could be interconnected, and Roman settlements could have running water and baths and these types of things. And so movement and travel, economic stability, and so forth all existed during this time period of the Pax Romana. Though it should be known and noted that even though this is called the Roman peace, there are still long-running conflicts during this time period, particularly the conflicts occurring in Europe, in the areas where they're fighting Germanic barbarians, as they would have called them, in areas in what is today Central Europe and Northern Europe. So there were these types of issues as well. In addition, it should be noted that this does not mean that all of the emperors during this period of time were somehow good leaders necessarily. Rather, there were actually some of the most terrifying and tyrannical leaders during this period of time. So the Pax Romana as a term should not lead us to think that everything was good and everything was peaceful, but rather to understand that it's a period of overwhelming stability in Rome as a whole that made movement, trade, and development from an economic sense possible. Indeed, it is this period of time that makes the expansion of Christianity largely possible because of roadways and trade routes being safe and traversable. Despite the fact that this period from 27 BCE to 180 or 181 CE is known as the Pax Romana, the reality is there were some massive problems with political leadership during this time. And this really was one of the issues with empire. So what had happened in Rome is you had gone from a Roman republic, which was run by a legislator, basically, the Senate and the Tribune of the Plebes, for example. And these entities oversaw laws and these types of things. When you come to the period of empire, you're now talking about basically an emperor who is more or less an authoritarian emperor who has total power. Now, just because you have total power does not mean you don't still rely on the Senate. They still relied on the Senate. They still relied on these bodies to raise taxes, to encourage people in their domains to act a certain way, to carry out laws, to carry out trials. Members of the Senate oftentimes oversaw trials. The problem with emperors is that the political reality is really only going to be as stable and peaceful as is the virtue of the leader. And so even though this period was known as the Pax Romana, it also really demonstrates the problem of having a political system that is based largely on empire, in which emperors appoint successors, successors vie with their rivals, they kill their rivals in some cases to try to maintain and continue this level of imperial control. And so a real problem with this period of time for Rome was really a deterioration of the political process. When you had good, strong leaders, there were good times for Rome. When you had bad leaders, there were very bad times for Rome. And so one of the factors in the demise of Rome is this problem with political leadership and the fact that you no longer had a system in which leaders were selected by a larger body, but rather leaders were really down to their appointment being named by an emperor. And depending on how good an emperor that the emperor was in raising or overseeing the training of the next emperor, this could create a lot of problems. So even though it's a period of the Pax Romana, we also see it open the door to some serious political problems in Rome. The Pax Romana largely is broken up into these three different political dynasties, if you will. The Julio-Claudian dynasty, which runs from Augustus in 27 BCE to the suicide of Nero in 68 CE. Now here you have a case where Augustus is a very good leader. Rome rises to its sort of peak potential. Then Tiberius is not a very strong leader. He actually spends the last decade or so of his time as emperor on the island of Capri, completely separated from his population. He became associated with debauchery and really lost the heart of the Roman people. Tiberius's heir was Caligula, and Caligula went down as one of the most tyrannical of all the Roman leaders. Caligula, of course, becomes associated with, even though Caligula in his first few months as emperor was kind of really liked by the people and was doing things that the people really appreciated, and he was popular initially, but Caligula fell ill early on in his time period, and when he comes out of his illness, he becomes increasingly paranoid that people are trying to kill him and people are trying to murder him, and so he eventually undertakes massive purge of potential political opponents that results in the death of thousands of people. He became involved in incestuous relationships with his sisters. At least this is what the Roman narrative says. Some have doubted that happened. So he was allegedly involved in incestuous relationships with his sister. He built sort of flamboyant monuments to himself. He almost bankrupted the Roman state. And so Caligula was a very bad leader, and he was murdered by, not exactly by the Senate. He was murdered by the Praetorian Guard, who then oversaw Claudius's rise. And then, of course, Nero infamously was one of the most negligent and tyrannical of the Roman emperors, eventually committing suicide. The Julio-Claudians were followed by the Flavians, and this included Vespasian, who oversaw the completion of the Colosseum in Rome, Titus, and Domitian. And here we see, again, with the case of Domitian, for example, you see an emperor who rewards his loyal soldiers and sort of purges his potential political enemies. And this is all during the Pax Romana. So again, even though you have this time of heightened Roman stability in the greater Mediterranean world, yes, you still have war going on in the areas of what is today Central Europe and modern Germany and places like this, and Austria, with the so-called Germanic barbarians, but you also have real political problems. It's not always a good time to be a Roman in this period of time. Though many would suggest that sort of the height of good leadership, if you will, during this period was under the leadership of the so-called 5 good emperors: Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antonius Pius, and Marcus Aurelius, who you see here. This is Marcus Aurelius in this this statue is of Marcus Aurelius. Marcus Aurelius is one of the most remembered of the Roman emperors. He was a well-liked emperor, and he was, all things being equal, a practical and good emperor. The last of the 5 good emperors, and his death gives rise to the demise of the Pax Romana. His heir was Commodus, and Commodus was a very, very problematic leader for a number of reasons. Marcus Aurelius is associated with the philosophy Stoicism at the time, and he wrote his famous Meditations are still read to this day in the modern world in the 21st century. Stoicism is a form of philosophy that kind of contrasted with another philosophy from this era known as Epicureanism. And Stoicism is based on the idea that you do what's right, you do your duty, and you take a middle path. You avoid extremes in the area of physical pleasure and of personal desires, if you will, whether it's greed or pleasure. Epicureans believed that while Epicureans were not hedonists per se, but Epicureans believed that basically all things that really mattered were physical pleasure. And so Epicureans would be much more inclined to pursue the desires of physical pleasure. Here you see the Roman Empire at its height. It reaches its height during the 5 good emperors, and of course the wall to Hadrian is right here. I'll show you some photos that I took from Hadrian's Wall in a little bit, but this is the full scope of Roman expansion. During the Pax Romana, many wars were fought on this frontier in Central Europe, and of course the reason we call it the Pax Romana is because this area, a Roman lake as it was sometimes called, made for relatively easy trade and travel with effective roadways, peaceful waterways, aqueducts providing flowing water, and so forth. So this is known as the Pax Romana, but we see as this expansion happens, we see it open the door to some of the problems that bring Rome down, especially with political leadership, and the fact that the chance of good leaders shapes tremendously. The chance of good leaders or not good leaders or bad leaders very much can tremendously shape the future of the power of the Roman state. During the period of the Roman Empire and the Pax Romana and beyond, one of the ways that the city's population, Rome's population, and other areas of Rome were sort of satisfied and placated was one through the provision of food and bread and grain and gladiatorial games. Gladiatorial games were political theater, really. And this, of course, is the Roman Colosseum. And here you see the inside of the Roman Colosseum. This area, you see the end here that is covered. This entire area would be covered. And under here are where the various combatants would be. These would have all been seats up around here. Of course, the outside of the Colosseum. And down here you can see from the other end of the Roman Forum, you can see the Colosseum right here. From, again, these hills that surround ancient Rome. The gladiatorial games were not just events to sort of act as spectator sports. It was really political theater. These events were staged. Oftentimes, they were designed to recreate, if you will, versions of Rome's greatest triumph. There were thousands of animals and thousands of people slaughtered in the Colosseum Games. In many cases, they were designed, though, to placate the population. These were not things that people had to pay for necessarily. You could come there. Oftentimes, the animals that were slaughtered were used and fed to the people. People witnessed reenactments of great Roman victories on the battlefield that made them feel a sort of greatness to be part of Rome. And so the Roman Colosseum during the time of empire, when the people's sort of voice is really non-existent in government, and when the well-being of the people really comes down to the whims of who's in power at the time, things like the Colosseum were used to sort of placate the people, to keep them satisfied, to keep them at bay, while promises were made for a better future. And so this was very much political theater and very much in line with the larger sort of state propaganda of the time. In the city of Rome, there were theaters, many theaters. There was plumbing in many areas, and there were lots of temples. However, if you're in a poor area, then you're talking about sewage in the streets. The city, particularly in poor areas, was quite dirty. There was a lot of disease. In fact, Marcus Aurelius died as a victim of the Antonine Plague, which was a 15-year plague. It might have been measles or smallpox. We're not sure. But it was a 15-year plague that was brought into Rome, probably by Roman soldiers returning from wars in the Near East. So Rome creates this massive interconnected area, right? And that interconnected area means that people are trading and exchanging and moving about from large, far-flung areas. And that opens the door to, things like pandemic disease, or epidemic disease, I suppose I should say. And so there was disease problems in the city. There was sewer. Fires were regular issues within the city of Rome. Gladiatorial games, of course, were a way that you, as I mentioned, we placated society. It was entertainment, but it was also a form of political theater. Roman society is patriarchal. It is male-dominated, and men are directed, if you will, to be, if you will, emperors in their own house. And men had an overwhelming amount of authority over their wife, over their children, and so forth. And so it's a very patriarchal society. It's a male-dominated society. Chariot racing was a love of the Romans, as it was of those in the Byzantine Empire, which would later be known as the Eastern Roman Empire. In the city of Rome, the Circus Maximus is where some of the chariot races occurred, and these were huge spectacle events for Romans that were greatly enjoyed. Rome developed its own legal system, though the Roman legal system during the period of the Western Roman Empire is never really formally codified, though there are a number of significant developments from this. The concept of innocent until proven guilty is a development of this. The right to challenge your accuser before a judge emerges in Roman society. That said, though, judges could set aside laws. Under a number of emperors during the imperial period, you had treason trials in which the Senate would oversee mock trials that sometimes, or I should say show trials, that were really oftentimes set up trials to persecute an enemy of the state or an enemy of a political rival, I should say. So treason trials are largely designed to attack and alienate political rivals, and individuals like Tiberius was notorious for treason trials. They were unpopular by the population, and they were ways that political opponents could be eliminated with ease, with a degree of legitimacy. And we have to remember that emperors, too, oftentimes undertook brutal reigns of terror against their political rivals. If you're interested in learning more about places like Pompeii, I strongly encourage you to watch my videos on Pompeii. I have a video on Pompeii. I visited on site. Of course, this picture I took, and I encourage you to watch that video on Pompeii. You can find that in my YouTube channel. Or if you're in my class, you can find this in, of course, our classroom. You see behind, this is the city of Pompeii, which was buried by the ash and rubble of Mount Vesuvius's eruption in 79 CE. And for this reason, Pompeii really provides a unique look into what a small Roman city might have been like, the way people might have lived, the way people might have eaten, the way people might have gone about their day-to-day lives. You see in the background here Vesuvius with its cratered out top from the massive eruption in 79 CE that buried this city and left it sort of hidden to the world for hundreds and hundreds of years. Pompeii, and of course, the city of Herculaneum as well. And today they are artifacts of history. And again, I encourage you to watch my short film on Pompeii. The Romans were influential builders. One of the most significant elements of Roman building actually were roads. And this is also from Pompeii here. And you can kind of see the Roman building with the bricks. Romans often use bricks in their building, and then they would cover the bricks with a plaster like covering to make it look like pure marble. But most of their building structures are made of brick with a covering on it. Their roadways, this is a roadway from Pompeii, and this speaks to just how impressive Roman roads were. These roads created sort of an interconnected network sphere in the greater Roman Empire. It allowed people to move, trade, and exchange throughout Rome. They innovated concrete, which was very fundamental in a number of the things they built. They had an advanced navy that kept the seas free of pirates. They built massive aqueducts that moved water across many kilometers to various settlements so that there could be running water in the sense of baths and drinking water, even though there were still huge problems with the unsanitary conditions in most Roman cities. Roman road systems were marked. They were usually wide. This, of course, is a town road, so it's a little bit different. They provided for trade on a large scale, and of course, there was commercial agriculture that was facilitated to a large degree with the use of slavery. Here you see the Pont du Gard, the largest existing Roman aqueduct. This is in southern France. This aqueduct, which is a freestanding stone structure, this aqueduct provided fresh water to the Roman settlement of Nimes in France. And this is a massively impressive structure that I'm not even sure the picture does true justice to. And this, again, is the Pont du Gard, an aqueduct in France, which made it possible to get fresh water to the many Roman settlements during the height of the Roman Empire. This is the water pipe of this aqueduct, and at one time it would have been fully stopped up, but now they've got a small hole in there to allow you to see how water would have flown through this water pipe. It would have been stopped up because of the mineral formations over time. After the fall of Rome, it really was not maintained, and so the bridge was used during the Middle Ages, but the aqueducts of the Roman Empire were really allowed to fall into disrepute in the early Middle Ages. Here you see an example of the triumphal arches that the Romans are so famous for. And if you look on the inside of this triumphal arch, you can see here, this is from the prisoners that were taken in the conquest of the areas of Palestine. And you can see the Jewish menorah here. And these are Jewish prisoners in the basically the conquest of Jewish people in the area of modern Palestine. And of course, it's during this time period that you will see the development of Christianity in that region. And it is maybe somewhat ironic that the Pax Romana will make it possible for Christianity to move throughout the world, to be these new ideas to be shared, and eventually it becomes so popular that it is adopted as the state religion of Rome in the 4th century CE. In Rome today, too, you find many obelisks like this. This is an Egyptian obelisk. The Romans pillaged many obelisks from ancient Egypt, and they moved them, and they are found throughout Rome. And they were kind of like, in the Roman times, they were kind of like almost like road signs, because the obelisks are all positioned in certain locations, and they allowed an individual to figure out where they were at in a certain part of the city. Now today, you see this obelisk, which is outside of St. Peter's Basilica, and it has the cross on top of it, again, sort of demonstrating the ascension of Christianity in the Roman state. Well, in the Italian state. It is in the Roman state, but also in the Italian state, as this is outside of the Vatican. This is a Roman amphitheater, a Roman Colosseum. This was built by the Flavian Emperor Domitian. This is in Arles, which is in southern France near Marseille. It's an incredibly intact and actually still used amphitheater dating back to the reign of Domitian at the end of the 1st century CE. This is remnants of one of the gatehouses of Hadrian's Wall. Hadrian's Wall, which is on the full expanse of the Roman Empire, effectively on the border, not exactly, but effectively on the border of northern England and Scotland, built by the Emperor Hadrian during his rule. Hadrian, one of the 5 good emperors in the 2nd century. Here's another look at part of Hadrian's Wall in northern England today, in the most far-flung reaches of Roman influence in Brittany, as it would be known at the time. Walls are very important in Rome. This is the Aurelian walls, and over time, the Roman city had walls built around it as sieges and attacks from outside threats was a problem. The Aurelian walls were the last phase of wall building around the city of Rome during the imperial period. And the Aurelian walls, they're quite impressive. They're large. They incorporate a number of buildings throughout Rome as well. They actually had to be built largely by the people of Rome too, because the empire was so far flung that there weren't enough soldiers around to actually build this as, if you will, like a formal military state operation. But this speaks to some of the difficulties that Rome was having at the time with threats from outside forces. The fall of Rome, why does Rome fall? There are some immediate reasons. One reason, of course, are the movement of Germanic populations, the invasions of the Germanic peoples, as you see depicted in this map, is certainly a major reason for the fall of Rome. However, other longer-term reasons for the fall of Rome include poor leadership. In the century after the 5 good emperors, there was something in the way of 70 different claims to emperor in a period of less than a century. There was mass assassination, internal infighting, people purging political rivals, and so poor leadership in the state certainly facilitated the weakening of Rome. Poor leadership sometimes also exacerbated economic problems. As economic problems faced Rome, you would see efforts to expand more, to gain greater resources, to improve the amount of money in circulation. These were all problems too, and eventually Rome becomes overextended and increasingly vulnerable. Likewise, as you have a decline in leadership, you have economic problems, the people's sort of respect and recognition of their governing figures goes down too. And so the sort of passionate conviction that Augustus would have inspired for being Roman would no longer have been the case by the time you got to the 5th century. There were also environmental factors. There were some serious poor harvests that caused famine. These led to diseases like the Antonine Plague, of course, I mentioned. But you had problems with disease. You had problems with famine caused by environmental changes. in the environment at the time, and these worsened harvests, it made the conditions in Rome more fragile and opened the door for Germanic invasions. And ultimately, 476 CE is really just one date chosen for the fall of Rome. The city was sacked in 476 CE, but it had actually faced a number of problems like this throughout the century, and it would be sacked again in the 490s. Some of the lessons of the Roman Empire might be the importance of having checks and balances in political leadership, problems brought on when you have unchecked authoritarianism in leadership. Other issues might be associated with the cost of long-running wars and unchecked expansionism. Now, I will say as well that if you look here, you'll see the Eastern Roman Empire. The Eastern Roman Empire over here actually remains, and it does not collapse. Constantinople, which was founded by the Emperor Constantine, remained with its impressive defensive structures, and it remained and continued to exist until the city itself did not collapse until 1453, though the Byzantine Empire, as it was known, had been dwindling quite significantly prior to that. But the Eastern Roman Empire continued and became known as the Byzantine Empire, and continued to exist in some shape or form for 1,000 years after that.